You know that feeling when you walk into a room and suddenly everyone goes quiet, when you can feel their eyes scanning you, measuring you, deciding whether you belong. I lived in that silence for months. I became an expert at reading the language of raised eyebrows, the subtle shift in conversation when I approached, the way people would smile at me but never quite meet my eyes. If you've ever been made to feel like you're too much or not enough, like your very presence is somehow an inconvenience to the world around you, then you'll understand what I'm about to tell you. This isn't just another love story. This is about what happens when the universe decides to test everything you thought you knew about power, about worth, about who gets to decide where you belong. They wanted me gone. His billion-dollar family, the media, even some of my own friends thought I should just quietly step aside, make it easy for everyone, disappear. But here's what I learned during those dark months, when it felt like the whole world was against us. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to make yourself smaller. I'm about to tell you how a black woman from Detroit ended up in a battle for love that became a battle for my right to exist in spaces that were never meant for me. How I learned the difference between fitting in and belonging. And how sometimes, when you're brave enough to stand in your truth, the universe has a way of rearranging itself around you in ways you never saw coming. So if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been told your dreams are too big or your voice is too loud, stay with me. Hit that subscribe button right now, because by the time I'm done, you'll understand why refusing to disappear isn't just an act of defiance. It's an act of revolution. And trust me, you won't want to miss how this story ends, because the ending, it's going to change how you see everything. I wasn't looking for love that night. Honestly, I was exhausted. It had been one of those weeks where everything that could go wrong at the gallery did. The new installation wasn't hanging right. Two of our featured artists were having dramatic feuds over wall space, and I'd been surviving on coffee and determination for 3 straight days. But the opening night of the Harlem Renaissance retrospective was too important to miss, even if I felt like I was running on fumes. I was standing in front of a piece by Augusta Savage, completely lost in the way she'd captured defiance in bronze, when this voice behind me said she had to fight just to get her hands on the clay. I turned around expecting to see another art student, or maybe one of the older collectors who liked to show off their knowledge. Instead, I found myself looking at this tall, somewhat rumpled guy in an expensive suit that he clearly wasn't comfortable wearing. Most people don't know that story, I said, surprised. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of face that made you want to keep talking. The racist sculpture program that tried to keep her out, how she ended up teaching kids in Harlem instead. The world's loss, he said simply. Though I'd argue those kids in Harlem got something more valuable than any fancy art school could have given them. There was something in his voice, a genuine anger about injustice, that caught me off guard. Rich white guys at gallery openings usually didn't talk like that. We spent the next 3 hours walking through the exhibition, not networking, not making small talk about the wine selection, but really talking about art, about history, about the stories that get erased and the ones that survive. He knew about redlining in Detroit, about the way urban renewal destroyed thriving Black communities. I found myself telling him about my grandmother, how she'd been a seamstress who saved every penny to buy her first home, only to watch the neighborhood get demolished for a highway that never came. When the gallery started closing, he asked if I wanted to get coffee. Not dinner at some fancy place, just coffee. We walked 6 blocks to this little Ethiopian place that stayed open late, and I watched this billionaire, because by then I'd figured out who he was, try to eat injera with his hands for the first time, laughing when it fell apart. That's when I started falling, not because of the money or the power, but because of the way he listened. Like my words mattered, like I mattered. For 3 months, we existed in this beautiful, impossible bubble. Jonathan would text me at random hours with articles he'd found about forgotten Black artists or photos of murals he'd spotted during his business trips. I'd send him voice notes walking through different neighborhoods, pointing out architectural details that told stories about who used to live there, who got pushed out, who stayed and fought. Our first real date wasn't at some Michelin-starred restaurant. He picked me up in a regular car, not even his car. He'd borrowed it from his assistant, and drove us to this tiny soul food place in Queens that his college roommate had recommended years ago. I watched this man, who probably hadn't eaten anywhere without a reservation in decades, fumble with a plastic menu, asking me what I thought he should try. When the owner, Miss Ruby, came over and started telling him about her grandson's art scholarship, he pulled out his phone and genuinely took notes. The thing about Jonathan that surprised me most was how curious he was about everything. My world, my family, the way I moved through spaces he'd never had to navigate. When I told him about growing up in Detroit, about watching my mother work 3 jobs to keep us in a decent school district, he didn't give me that pitying look I was used to. Instead, he asked questions that showed he was really listening. What was it like being the first person in your family to go to college? How did it feel when your neighborhood started changing? What kept you going when everyone said art wasn't a practical career? He told me about the pressure too, but it was different. The weight of carrying a family name, of having every decision scrutinized by boards and shareholders. How lonely it was to never know if people liked him or his bank account. We'd spend hours in my tiny apartment in Harlem, cooking together. Well, I'd cook while he sat at my kitchen counter, learning to chop vegetables properly, telling me about the tech innovations he was excited about, the ways he wanted to use his platform to create real change. Those Saturday mornings, when we'd walk through Central Park, grabbing coffee from street vendors instead of fancy cafes, felt like stolen time. He'd hold my hand without thinking about who might see us. I'd catch him staring at me sometimes, this look of wonder on his face, like he couldn't believe this was real. I should have known it was too perfect to last. Perfect bubbles always pop eventually. I knew something was wrong the moment Jonathan walked through my door that Tuesday night. His shoulders were tight, his jaw clenched in a way I'd never seen before. He'd been at what he called a family dinner, one of those monthly obligations at his parents' Upper East Side penthouse that he usually came back from, with funny stories about his mother's latest charity drama or his father's attempts to understand cryptocurrency. This time, there were no stories. He sat on my couch and stared at his hands for a full minute before he could even look at me. "They know about us," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Someone saw us at the museum last week. Took pictures." My stomach dropped. We'd been so careful for 3 months, but last weekend we'd gotten comfortable, holding hands as we walked through the Met, stealing kisses in the sculpture garden. It felt normal, natural. I should have remembered that normal wasn't something we were allowed to have. "They want to meet you," he continued, but the way he said it made it clear this wasn't the kind of meeting where his mother would offer me tea and ask about my family. "Actually, no, that's not true. They want me to end this before it goes any further." The room felt smaller suddenly. I could picture it perfectly. Jonathan sitting at that massive dining table while his parents and probably his sister laid out all the reasons why I was wrong for him, wrong for the family, wrong for the image they'd spent decades crafting. I'd seen his mother, Patricia, at charity events, the way she commanded rooms with her icy perfection, the way she could smile and destroy someone at the same time. "What did you tell them?" I asked, though I was terrified of the answer. Jonathan ran his hands through his hair, that nervous habit I'd grown to love. And for the first time since I'd known him, he looked lost. "I told them I love you," he said, and my heart should have soared. Instead, it broke a little, because I could hear the but coming. "But Amara, you don't understand the pressure. The company, the board, the investors, they're all watching. My mother said if I don't end this quietly, they'll find ways to make it very public and very messy for both of us." That's when I realized this wasn't just about love anymore. This was about war. The first photo appeared on page 6 3 days later. It was from that night at the Ethiopian restaurant, grainy and taken from across the street, but clear enough to show Jonathan's face and my profile. The headline read, Tech billionaire's mystery woman. Who is she? I stared at my phone screen, my coffee growing cold in my hands, as my private life became public entertainment. By noon, there were 5 more articles. By evening, someone had found my LinkedIn, my gallery bio, even my old college graduation photos. The comments section was a battlefield I wasn't prepared for. Gold digger. He's going through a phase. She's pretty, for her type. Each word felt like a small knife, but I kept reading, some masochistic part of me needing to know exactly what they were saying about me. The worst part wasn't the strangers online. It was watching how people in my own world started treating me differently. Gallery patrons who used to greet me warmly now offered tight smiles and avoided eye contact. My assistant, Melissa, started fielding calls from reporters wanting to know about my relationship history and career ambitions. Even my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who usually stopped to chat about her grandson's art classes, hurried past me in the hallway. At work, conversations would stop when I walked into rooms. I caught 2 board members whispering near the contemporary collection, and I swear I heard one of them say, "Publicity stunt." My boss, Richard, called me into his office with that uncomfortable expression he got when he had to discuss delicate matters. He assured me the gallery supported me, but perhaps I should consider the optics of my personal life affecting our reputation. Jonathan tried to shield me from the worst of it, but I could see it wearing on him too. His phone rang constantly, with calls from his publicist, his lawyer, his mother. We stopped going out together. Our bubble had completely burst, replaced by this suffocating attention that followed me everywhere. Even grocery shopping became an ordeal. Was that person staring because they recognized me, or was I just being paranoid? The cruelest part was how they made me question everything. Was I naive to think this could work? Was I being selfish, dragging him into this mess? Late at night, staring at the ceiling while Jonathan slept fitfully beside me, I started to wonder if everyone was right. Maybe I should just disappear, make it easy for everyone. Maybe I wasn't built for this kind of scrutiny after all. The company's quarterly board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday in November. Jonathan had casually mentioned it weeks before, but on Tuesday, his assistant called to ask if I'd consider attending as his guest. "It would mean a lot to him," she said carefully, "to have you there for moral support." I should have known it was a test. The moment we walked into that marble-clad conference room on the 32nd floor, I felt the weight of every gaze. These weren't just business associates. These were the people who controlled Jonathan's future. Men in $1,000 suits who saw me as a threat to their carefully maintained order. Patricia was there too, impeccably dressed in navy Chanel, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. She made a point of introducing me to everyone as Jonathan's friend, drawing out the word like it tasted bitter. "Amara works in arts and crafts, isn't that right, dear?" The dismissal was surgical, precise, designed to make me feel small without anyone else catching the blade. During the break, I overheard board members Charles Whitmore talking to another man by the coffee station. "Stock prices are already volatile with the new regulations. We can't afford distractions right now." His eyes flicked toward me meaningfully. "Shareholders are asking questions about leadership stability." The numbers started making sense then. Every whispered conversation, every meaningful look. They weren't just concerned about family reputation. They saw me as a liability that could cost millions. I was a risk assessment that walked into rooms holding Jonathan's hand, a variable that didn't fit their carefully calculated projections. The breaking point came when Patricia cornered me in the ladies' room. "You seem like a nice girl," she said, reapplying her lipstick in the mirror while I washed my hands. "But you have to understand, this isn't just about Jonathan. This is about hundreds of employees, thousands of shareholders, a legacy that took 3 generations to build." She turned to face me directly, her voice silk over steel. "Surely, someone with your background understands what it means to put the greater good before personal desires." I walked back into that boardroom with my head high. But inside, I was crumbling. They'd found the perfect weapon, not just racism or classism, but the suggestion that by staying, I was being selfish. That loving Jonathan meant hurting everyone else who depended on him. That night, I started writing the letter that would end everything. I spent 3 days writing that letter, crumpling up draft after draft, trying to find words that could explain the impossible choice I was making. How do you tell someone you love them enough to leave? How do you say goodbye to the person who made you believe in forever? The final version was 2 pages, handwritten, on the cream-colored stationery my grandmother had given me for college. I told him about the board meeting, about his mother's words in the bathroom, about the weight I felt carrying his future in my hands. I won't be the reason you lose everything you've worked for, I wrote. I won't be the reason your employees lose their jobs or your family loses their legacy. Some love stories aren't meant for the real world, and maybe ours is one of them. I was supposed to leave it on his kitchen counter and disappear, but I couldn't bring myself to be that cruel. Instead, I waited until he came home from another emergency family meeting. His tie loosened, exhaustion written across his face. I handed him the letter and watched his expression change as he read, watched 3 months of happiness crumble in real time. "You're giving up on us," he said, his voice hollow. "After everything we've been through, you're just walking away." "I'm setting you free," I said, though the words felt like glass in my throat. "Your mother was right. I don't belong in your world, Jonathan. I've been fooling myself thinking I could fit into spaces that were never meant for people like me." He threw the letter on the floor, pages scattering. "So that's it? You're going to let them win? You're going to let fear decide our future?" "It's not fear," I lied. "It's reality. Look at what this has cost you already. Your relationship with your family, the stress at work, the media attention. I can't keep watching you sacrifice everything for me." I left that night while he was still arguing, still fighting for us when I'd already given up. I turned off my phone, ignored the knocking at my door, the texts from friends asking if I was okay. For 3 days, I stayed in my apartment, eating ice cream and crying through old movies, convincing myself I'd done the right thing. Then came the knock that changed everything. The knock came at 7 in the morning on a rainy Sunday. I'd been awake for hours anyway, staring at the ceiling and trying to convince myself that the hollow ache in my chest would eventually fade. When I opened the door, Jonathan was standing there soaked from the rain, holding a folder thick with papers and wearing the biggest smile I'd seen in weeks. "You're not getting rid of me that easily," he said, pushing past me into my apartment. His hair was dripping, his expensive coat ruined, and he looked absolutely terrible. He also looked happier than I'd seen him since this whole nightmare started. "Jonathan, we talked about this." "No," he interrupted, spreading the papers across my coffee table. "You talked, you decided, you gave up, but you forgot something important. I get a vote too." He pulled out a chair and gestured for me to sit. "I need you to see something." The papers were incorporation documents, business licenses, partnership agreements. At the top of the first page, in bold letters, Meridian Technologies, LLC. I looked up at him, confused, and he was practically bouncing with nervous energy. "I quit," he said simply. "Walked into the board meeting Friday morning, thanked them for their years of service, and resigned as CEO. My cousin Michael can have the job. He's been waiting for it his whole life anyway." He sat across from me, reaching for my hands. "But here's the thing, Amara. I'm not walking away empty-handed." He explained it all in a rush, how he'd been planning this for weeks, even before I left, how 7 of his top engineers and 3 major investors had agreed to follow him to a new company, how his resignation had actually stabilized the stock price, because the board finally had the leadership consistency they'd been crying about. The best part? His eyes were shining now. "My father called yesterday. Turns out, seeing me choose principle over profit reminded him why he started the original company in the first place. He's our first major investor." I stared at the papers, at this man who had just rearranged his entire life, and felt something shift inside my chest. "You did all this? For us?" "I did this for me," he said firmly. "You didn't make me lose anything, Amara. You helped me find what actually matters. And what matters is building something real with someone I love. For the first time in days, I let myself hope again. 1 year later, I'm standing in my own gallery space in Brooklyn, watching Jonathan explain blockchain technology to my 70-year-old neighbor, Miss Rodriguez, who's genuinely interested in how it could help artists protect their work. His company, Meridian Technologies, just closed their Series A funding round. My gallery, Roots and Revolutions, is booked solid through next spring. We're engaged now, planning a wedding that looks nothing like what his family originally envisioned. No country club, no society photographer, just a celebration in Prospect Park with food from that Ethiopian restaurant where we had our first real date. Patricia and I still circle each other carefully at family dinners, but she sent me a handwritten note after our engagement announcement. "Welcome to the family," it said. "Progress is progress,